Hi folks, this is Jake from Tier 3 Tactical. Today we're talking about an article I wrote called Gunfighting and Neuroscience Why Using Your Front Sight Might Kill You. Success in a gunfight really doesn't depend on how well you shoot, it depends on how well you see. And unfortunately this is an aspect of self-defense that the community kind of ignores. They spend a lot of time on the mechanics of shooting, but they don't really talk about the importance of seeing what you need to see, and this has a huge impact on firearms training. Many years ago, I actually did study in psychology. That's what my degree is in. And as a result of that training, you have to take a course in cognitive psychology. And part of that course covers the human visual system. And you might think that's not quite normal for psychologists, as you kind of think of hearing people talk about their problems on a couch, but there's a lot of different psychologists, especially research psychologists. But in that course, we talked about how complex the visual system can be, and even people that specialize in this type of research often will admit that they don't have a full understanding of how vision system works, so it can be quite important. Today we're going to talk about an important concept in terms of visual processing called the quiet eye. Longtime readers of my website or followers of this YouTube channel will know that I've written about the quiet eye before, and it is a very important aspect that predicts expert performance in nearly any kind of field, whether that's basketball, soccer, gunfighting. Any kind of field that requires physical movement and hand-eye coordination is going to require you to demonstrate expert quiet eye. So some of you might be asking, what exactly is the quiet eye? The quiet eye is technically determined as the final fixation on a location that is within 3 degrees of a visual angle for a minimum of 100 milliseconds, or 1/10 of a second. In simpler terms, that just means a spot that you look on prior to executing a task. If we're going back to a free throw metaphor, that would be something like looking at the rim of the basketball goal before executing that free throw. And there are numerous other examples which we're going to talk about. But specifically today, we're going to talk about some excellent research that looked at quiet eye for self-defense encounters. The first bit of research we're going to talk about was done by Force Science Institute. Now, this is very interesting. They compared 2 groups of officers, brand new officers who just graduated the academy and had their firearms training, but only at a basic level. They compared them to veteran SWAT officers who, as you might imagine, have much more experience in training and use of force scenarios. They put them in the same types of use of force scenarios where they observed a role player interact with a secretary that became angry, and then they would turn around and either present a gun or a cell phone in the scenario. And each person did numerous versions of this. And the goal was to measure who shot first, the accuracy, where the hits were, and more importantly, was the correct shoot no shoot determination, did that happen? So did you shoot the person who presented a lethal threat, and did you not shoot the person who only presented the cell phone? Let's get into the results of this experiment. As you might imagine, they are quite different. The emergency response team, the SWAT officers, did much better than the rookies. They hit their targets 75% of the time. The rookies hit 54% of the time. More importantly, 18% of the officers shot at the assailant when they brandished the cell phone. Sorry, that's the expert officers, whereas an astounding 62% of rookies incorrectly shot the assailant. The expert officers also shot before the assailant in 93% of the trials, whereas rookies only did that 42% of the time. And rookies were also hit 58% of the time by the offender. So it's a bad day to be a rookie. But most tellingly, the biggest difference in terms of the quiet eye was that expert officers watched the locations on the target prior to the presentation where a gun would appear. They are able to track those locations. They are able to identify the weapon prior to it being actually fully visible. So they saw that weapon and they were able to track it the full time. They also did not take their eye off of that weapon. They managed to present their firearm, line up their sights without changing their focus. Only about 24% of the SWAT officers did actually look at their front sight prior to firing. The rookies, on the other hand, about 84% of them had to look at their front sight before firing. This was crucial. It broke their quiet eye, and they were forced to then re-engage the target with their eyes before they could actually shoot. And this caused the drastic amount of errors you saw in terms of shooting the person who presented a cell phone, and it also caused them to be slower on average than the assailant was when they were firing a shot. Let's talk about some of these sighting methods and talk about why looking at your front sight may not be the best method to actually defend yourself in an actual engagement. Remember, the goal of any sighting system is to align the weapon so you know where it's going to, what you're going to hit when you fire the round. Iron sights are just a method of doing that. You can do a red dot sight. You can have a magnified system like in a scope, but any sighting system just helps you align the weapon. You don't need to look at any certain way. You need to align the weapon. So I'm not telling you not to use your front sights. I'm trying to say that with sufficient practice, you can get to the point where you don't necessarily need to have a hard front sight focus to shoot accurately. In fact, there's a video that's in the article linked in the description below where national champion shooter Ben Steger is doing target focus shooting with iron sights at 25 yards on a partial target. So he's shooting at something that's very hard at 25 yards without actually focusing on his front sight. Now, Ben is the best pistol shooter in the world, so I don't expect everybody to do that, but you don't need his level of expertise to realize that you can have a good sight alignment in your peripheral vision and then be able to engage a target closely. In fact, a lot of folks that report being in self-defense shootings don't recall having any front sight focus, and that's because they're brain focused on the target and they perform those functions on autopilot, so to speak. Not only is maintaining your quiet eye on those key positions where a weapon might be produced important for winning a gunfight, it also has some other physiological benefits that you may not necessarily know of. There's been some other research, again linked in the article that's in the description below, that talks about the physiological benefits. It's about a 50-page research review where the author highlights the importance of having a quiet eye, and he highlights that your actual physiological measures of stress, such as your heart rate, actually decrease when you are using your quiet eye correctly. So when you have a task to focus on by watching certain areas of the body, or looking at an elbow position during a weapons presentation, or looking at a subject's hands when they are doing something that you can't quite tell, having that key thing to focus on actually allows you to be under less physiological stress. And if you've read any of my other articles about force on force and the effects of stress on shooting, you'll understand that that is a big benefit. High levels of stress and fine motor skills do not go together, and it actually makes folks that are more stressed out in a situation less accurate, and more importantly, they are more prone to shoot whether they should be or not. So anything that can lower your physiological levels of stress is only going to increase your survivability. This leads us to the question, where do we go from here? What can we take from this research that is actually practical? One thing is an equipment-based recommendation. Those of you who've shot with a red dot mounted on your pistol, you'll understand that is much easier to remain target focused. That's the whole benefit of a red dot. You look where you want, the red dot appears in front of your face, and you can pull the trigger. So that is one piece of equipment that actually is backed up by science that shows it's much more accurate and much easier to use in these self-defense scenarios, provided that you have enough reps with that equipment that you have a natural point of aim. You don't have to think about aiming it or moving the pistol around. It just kind of appears in your sight. The researchers also recommended that they practice in a way that mimics what experts are doing. We have to track those expert gaze patterns and teach those to shooters. So there are a few pieces of key information that you can use to determine if a person means you harm. Do they have a weapon that's going to be in their hands? Are they drawing their hands or moving their arms in a way that indicate a weapon is likely to be presented? And which areas are the most common areas to carry a firearm? All those things are pretty well researched. Criminals often carry firearms on their waistband or in the front of their pants. A high elbow position is often a key indicator that a weapon is going to be drawn and not something like a wallet. So these are gaze patterns that we can teach new people, and then the longer they get to practice with those, the more they develop their quiet eye. That in addition to dry fire. That is probably the biggest key. Now, I've got some links in the article that's down in the description below that's going to help you with some dry fire, and I've got a great free dry fire simulator that I like to use that you should use as well. So I really recommend that. But the whole point of dry fire is you build up those mechanical skills so you don't have to think about what you're doing with your weapon. You can think about solving the problem. You can think about identifying a weapon with your quiet eye. And lastly, I recommend that you check out some competition shooting. The best way to get better at anything, any endeavor, is to find some competition that tests that. And competition shooting is drastically going to help your gun handling skills. You're going to be around folks that have years and decades more experience and will be able to help you out. And it's just a lot of fun. So I highly recommend that. In the article, I've got a link to my guide to getting started in USPSA. It's all completely free, and it just kind of walks you through the basics of the rules and what kind of equipment you might need. So that's it for this article. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out the link below, and please consider subscribing. We are trying to grow our YouTube channel, and if you wouldn't mind, share it with someone who you think might enjoy this kind of article. Thanks.